Hello, I'm Riz Khan. More people will head to the polls in 2024 than ever before. 76 countries will hold elections, whether at the national, regional or local level, representing over 4 billion people. That's half the world's population. Well, it's likely that one, above all else, will capture most attention, and that's the race for the White House, the 2024 US presidential election. On this episode of the show, we'll hear from two prominent political strategists with very differing views of former President Donald Trump.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
And I'll sit down with the independent candidate who in some polls came out higher than both Biden and Trump. Hailing from the best-known family in American politics, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hopes to make an impact in a close-run race. Well, let's start with the race for the Republican nomination, where Nikki Haley is hoping for home state support in South Carolina to derail the seemingly unstoppable Trump train. I'm joined now down the line from Tallahassee in Florida by the former Republican strategist and founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. And here with me in the studio is Mark Lotter, Chief Communications Officer of the America First Policy Institute. He served as Director of Strategic Communications during the Trump-Pence campaign in 2020. Rick, I'm going to start with you. Thanks for joining us there from Florida.
Certainly.
You believe that Donald Trump has a stronghold over the Republican Party, that it got stronger after 2016, the party that you supported for so long, and you say you find yourself a stranger in the Republican Party. Where does that leave you as a voter in 2024?
Well, look, I look at the record that we have from the first Trump administration. I contrast it with the way the administration ended, especially on January 6th, with an illegal and dangerous attempt to overthrow a free and fair democratic election. And I find myself in a difficult position. As a conservative, I don't have to agree with Joe Biden on everything, but I do believe that he is more likely to preserve America's small d democratic institutions and a constitutional republic than Donald Trump, who is out overtly talking about, exercising power in an authoritarian way that I think is frankly dangerous.
I should point out you've written a couple of books, Rick, that the titles don't leave much to the imagination. Everything Trump touches dies. That was in 2018. And then Running Against the Devil in 2020. Do you see no redeeming features for this man?
I don't know how he treats cats and small animals, but generally speaking, I'm looking at him as a president, and I don't think he has the character or the leadership or frankly, the acumen to be president. We had an example when he mishandled COVID at such a scale and a level that ended up with 500,000 Americans passing away. We have witnessed what Trump is before, and so I'm not here to find good points about Donald Trump. I'm sure he loves his kids, but I'm not here to look at him as a human being necessarily. I'm looking at him as a presidential candidate and a leader. And that's where I find him personally coming up rather short.
All right, let's get the perspective of a man who knows him very well. Mark Lotter's joined us here. Thank you, Mark. You served as Director of Strategic Communications in the Trump-Pence 2020 campaign, as I mentioned, and you've been close to both Donald Trump and Mike Pence, whom actually Donald Trump eventually saw pretty much as a traitor and didn't have too many kind words for. You were his actual press secretary for so long.
For the first year, yes.
Yeah. So how hard is it to maintain a balanced and balanced perspective on a person who is as volatile and mercurial as Donald Trump?
Well, I look at it in terms of results, and I think so many people do when they're considering their vote for president, when they're thinking about who they are, and even judging presidents. And so, when you look at the fact that we had a strong economy, we had low energy prices, we had no war in the Middle East, no war raging in Europe. When you look at immigration being under control, those are the kinds of things, and they're the strong conservative principles, including judges, 3 Supreme Court justices. Those are the kinds of things that I typically value, both in whom I'm voting for. And I think, I would encourage people to look at the big difference between 2020 and 2024, as I look at these two elections, is Joe Biden didn't have a record in 2020 for us to run against. You're not going to run against what Barack Obama did. You're not going to go back the 50 years he was in the Senate on those kinds of issues. Well, he has a record now, and that's going to be a record that's going to be contrasted with the record of President Trump.
So how do you react when people describe Donald Trump as a person who has deeply divided America?
Well, I think we've been deeply divided and headed down that path for quite some time. And what I would say is that, again, judged by the results. We have not become more unified under Joe Biden, and he campaigned and talked in his inaugural speech about unifying the country. We've been ever so divided even more. And so what I think we have to do is really just focus in on those results, those pocketbook issues. And I think as America does better, whether it's economically or its presence around the world, I think success breeds success, and it will bring more people together.
Rick, I'll get back to you and ask, well, with things heating up in this year's race, to what extent did the New Hampshire primary effectively kill off Nikki Haley's ambition, ensuring that Donald Trump effectively becomes the nominated candidate? Or is there still perhaps a path to the White House for Nikki Haley?
Well, it didn't kill off her ambition, but it did kill off her path. I may not agree with Mark on a lot of things, but I think we both agree that Donald Trump has very good states for him coming up in the Republican primary. He'll do very well in her home state of South Carolina. When it comes down to Super Tuesday, Trump is going to win two big states on Super Tuesday, where he is presently ahead of her by 55 and 61 points respectively. That's Texas and California. He is going to wrap up a whole bunch of these states on Super Tuesday. And by March 19th, it's mathematically impossible if he wins these winner-take-all states on Super Tuesday and then wins Florida and Ohio when they come up about a week later. It's just a really impossible pathway for her to scale a campaign. Even if someone gave her $1 billion tomorrow, it's hard to go out, beat him in South Carolina, and then beat him on Super Tuesday in enough places to stay in the fight.
So the mark is it seems that every candidate who drops out of the race endorses President Trump. What is it? How does he have such a strong grip on the Republican Party? Is it affection or fear?
Well, I think it's also traditional that, regardless of party, when the folks who don't get the nomination or drop out, they usually or eventually get around to nominating or to endorsing the person who's going to get the nomination. That's true. I mean, obviously, Kamala Harris stood on the debate stage and called Joe Biden a racist, and flash forward a few months, and next thing you know, she's the vice presidential nominee. So that's not unusual in American politics, and I would anticipate that the vast majority of the elected leaders or the other candidates who are running are going to endorse Trump. So that's not really that far out of norm.
So then, Rick, how do you explain the grip that Donald Trump has over the Republican establishment?
Well, look, it breaks out in my mind in two significant columns. The first column is the sort of behavioral republicanism Mark was just talking about, where they do want to stay in the pack. They want to stay in the herd. They don't want to exit from the club. There is an element, and I've spoken to Republican candidates that I've known back in the past, some of whom are gone now from Congress or the Senate, but there is an element of fear. And that fear comes in both the fear of Trump's base, his mob, his group, his gang, whatever you want to call it. They are afraid of those people. Because they don't vote based on policy or rationality. They vote based on what Trump wants. So they're afraid of the sort of January 6th types, but they're also afraid that the MAGA base can be told by Trump at any moment, I don't like John Smith anymore, vote him out, and they're going to lose a primary, no matter how good they've been to their people in their district or their state. So that fear is a big driver of this. And the fear bifurcates again into two parts of it. It's physical and it's political fear. But I do think the folks endorsing him right now, some of them will get what they want, which is his attention, maybe a cabinet job. You've got Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, and others who are dancing the dance for Trump right now, pretending it was all a big joke. They always loved him all along, and they would never have done anything to hurt him. The real test is going to be Ron DeSantis, who I think will certainly break eventually. He sort of soft endorsed Trump, but he certainly could have done more in this. But we'll see. I think Haley is maybe playing a longer game and looking at 2028 and beyond and saying to herself, I'm going to push this fight as long as I can go, because he's not going to last forever. This movement won't last when he's gone, and I'll be the last one standing. We'll see how that works out.
So, Mark, interestingly enough, you talked about now there is a track record for Joe Biden that people can refer to. But if you look at what's happened to Donald Trump in the meantime, this is a man who lost the 2020 election but still kind of contests it. He faces 91 felony counts in 4 criminal cases. He could face substantial jail time, of course, if convicted. So why does that not affect the support of the voter base?
Well, I think many people see that as a two-tiered system of justice. We have obviously the charges that Donald Trump is currently facing, but then we have the Biden family taking tens of millions of dollars from foreign actors in a enterprise that only banked on one thing: selling Joe Biden's name and/or access to Joe Biden, and yet he gets away scot-free. And so they see these two systems of justice at work where. And they don't like it. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you see a rallying around Donald Trump, even though obviously he faces these charges, and the court systems will work itself out. But in the meantime, it's galvanizing a lot of support because they do see time and time again, whether it was the fake Russiagate hoax, whether it was the fake Ukraine impeachment, all of these things, the mainstream media, the radical Democrat left have targeted this man from the moment he came down the escalator through his transition, his election, his transition, and even into his first years in office. And I think they just see this as a continuation of that.
Now, Rick, there's no doubting Donald Trump's loyalty among his supporters. How does that change when we look at voters across all parties? To what extent does Donald Trump start to lose ground there?
Well, look, I think we had some interesting indications out of both Iowa and New Hampshire so far this year, and some indications that are also present in a lot of other public polling. We saw in both Iowa and New Hampshire, a good number of Haley's voters are saying right now that they're willing to vote for Joe Biden, that they're not going to vote for Donald Trump. Now, even if it's only 50% of the pool that says that right now, that can have a decisive impact in a lot of key electoral college states. We've also seen a shift in what we call the addressable voter block in the Lincoln Project, where in 2020, you could persuade between 3 and 8% of Republicans, depending on the state, that Donald Trump was not a good choice and to vote for Biden. Since the Dobbs decision, January 6th, and Trump's really, the massive criminal exposure Trump has found himself facing, that number has expanded in our polling and other polling to between 7 and 11%. That means there are groups of folks out there in key swing states that can be persuaded against Trump. And I also believe that as Trump's behavior, Mark probably doesn't want to say this, but whenever Donald Trump is doing well, he starts to act badly. This is a long pattern of those of us who are in the Trump anthropology business have observed. And so he'll start to get more and more cocky and do and say things that will harm him politically. I mean, for a guy who won New Hampshire, he's certainly acting like he's the most, whiny and hurt little child, tweeting about Nikki Haley dozens of times in the last couple of days, or truthing, whatever it is, and acting out. When voters are exposed to that kind of behavior from Trump, we've seen in our survey work and our focus group work and our behavioral modeling, they really don't like it. Now, some Republicans are going to always hold. Some of them will say they're open to it and they may not vote. But there's a critical mass out there that's larger than it was in 2020 that we believe that Biden can get to, and at least park him in neutral. Look, a vote not voting for either man in that case is a win for Joe Biden.
Actually, Mark, I'll give you a chance to respond to that. There's no doubt Donald Trump's quite unorthodox when it comes to politics and his reactions. But in spite of what Rick is saying, he seems to hold that support. But what do you feel about the fact that he starts to behave badly?
Well, I think he's actually starting to show even stronger support. I just looked this morning, according to the Real Clear Politics average, and Donald Trump has his largest lead over Joe Biden head-to-head in this cycle. And the thing that should be noted is that at no time during the 2019 or 2020, back during that cycle, did Donald Trump ever lead Joe Biden in a national poll, not swing states, but national poll. Never led him. He's leading him right now, been leading him now by almost 4%, and it's the largest lead he's ever had. When you go to the 7 swing states, and now there are 7 swing states, there are more swing states coming in than there were in 2020, Donald Trump is leading in 5 of those, and it's statistically tied basically in the other 2. All of these swing states, all of this national movement, I think, is because people are unhappy about Joe Biden's results, whether it's on the economy, immigration, energy, crime. You go down the line on the top 10 issues, Donald Trump's policies are preferred over Joe Biden. The people disapprove of Joe Biden by 60, 70%.
It's interesting. You raised all those topics that I was going to ask you about, the issues, the economy, the immigration, foreign policy, and so on. Which do you think will then favor Joe Biden? You said they're the ones that you listed the ones that Trump voters like.
Well, I think that, it's really difficult to tell. Immigration, he's not going to be able to change. He's not going to be able to turn it around. And even if for some reason he did something, unbelievable and actually closed the border, that does nothing about the 9 million people he's already let in. So that's definitely going to stay a negative. We're seeing some signs of potential improvement in certain economic statistics, but the ones that really matter, I think, the way people feel about the economy, their own pocketbook. He may lessen his disapproval. He may not ever eliminate it, because I think people are going to continue to feel that pain from the higher prices. And then who knows what's going to go on with both the war in Israel and in Ukraine. Both of them are negative right now. And really the war in Israel is one of his most difficult challenges, because there is a very small section, but very loud section of his woke progressive left that are very much pro-Hamas. And you have folks like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are basically saying, my constituents in Minnesota and Detroit will stay home because you are being too supportive of Israel. That's a problem for Joe Biden, and especially in Michigan, which is a swing state.
I may get back to that in a second, but I want to ask Rick, is time on the side of Joe Biden when it comes to trying to get some kind of change in the economy?
Well, I want to correct Mark a little bit on the economy right now. We are seeing now 5 million jobs have been added to the economy since Joe Biden took office. He is it's 5 million jobs above the pre-pandemic levels. We're at 14.9 million jobs added. We've got record job growth, wage growth for the first time in 50 years. We're about to have a series of 3 or 4 rate cuts. Inflation is asymptotically approaching zero again. It's moved down quickly. Food prices are up less than 1% in the last year. The brakes have come onto that. You're seeing people's 401ks and pensions are outperforming where they did in the entire Trump years, even if you even if you took COVID out of that equation. So you are actually seeing right now what we call the lag. Economic news has been good for about the last 2 or 3 months. It takes between 3 and 7 months for people to feel good economic news in their lives. So right around the midsummer time, when people are really starting to pay attention, you're going to see a much different economic assessment of where the Biden administration has been. And they've also done things that are actually making a meaningful difference in the lives of Americans out in the states. So, why did Republicans vote against the infrastructure bill but show up to every ribbon cutting? They know how popular these programs are in the districts. They know how popular they are in their states. Why is it that you're seeing Republicans try to shift to immigration while blocking any kind of immigration bill? Because they know the economic argument isn't working like it once did. Crime is at a record low in this country. The murder rate has fallen to a record low in this country. It fell significantly after the end of the Trump administration. So the economic news, the perspective on Joe Biden, and you know what, Mark is absolutely right about one thing. We completely agree on this. There's a noisy minority inside the Democratic Party that's way to the left of Joe Biden. And frankly, they've been put out to pasture by their own leadership in the House. And they're going to make a lot of noise. And that is an issue that he's going to have to address. But I also want to point out on the foreign policy question, Republicans are going to have to answer a lot of voters who are not young teenagers who are peeved about Gaza. They're going to have to answer a lot of voters why Republicans are so eager to let Vladimir Putin devour Ukraine, why they are so eager to side with an autocratic dictator in Russia and not with the free people of Ukraine. That's a question that we found, and we tested it in 2022. We've tested it again this year. It knocks Republicans' brains wide open when they go, wait, I don't favor Putin. I don't favor the Russians. But many, many parts of Trump's coalition are aggressively pro-Putin, and they want to see Ukraine destroyed.
Okay, Rick, I'm going to put some of these to Mark then. So first of all, economy, there's a lag that really by the time we get closer to the election, people will see the results and it'll be far more positive in favor of Joe Biden. The fact that a lot of people feel that the Trump camp is actually not doing the right thing when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. These kind of issues, especially foreign policy, how much do you think that will have an impact?
Well, I think it has an impact. In foreign policy always does, but when you look at the survey, and I've seen a lot of surveys recently that's ranking basically the top issues, economy is almost always number one. Right now we've seen immigration come in at number 2. So while the economy, and I agree with Rick that the economy always there's a lag period before the numbers show and people start to feel it. The problem is that the clock is ticking on Joe Biden. Inflation is still going going up. And the one thing about inflation that I think everybody gets wrong is that if the price of something went up $2.50 last year and 50 cents this year, you're not thankful it only went up 50 cents. You're still complaining it went up $3. And so every month that goes by, inflation and those prices keep coming up. Ukraine is a difficult challenge because there is a small subset of the Republican Party that believes that we should be arming Ukraine. The vast majority of the base right now is basically thinking that Europe needs to do more, that it should fall on Europe's shoulders, not the United States taxpayers, to provide that support. And so that's a divide, but not nearly the divide like what we've seen in the left with the Israel-Hamas war going on in the Middle East.
Mark, I'm going to throw something out there and get it to Rick afterwards. We've recently seen robocalls with an AI version of Joe Biden's voice being used to influence potential voters. AI has become a major player in such a short period of time in affecting the way people think in many areas. How do you think it's going to affect the election?
It scares the heck out of me. I'm not going to lie, because you've given power to political operatives on both sides, or really anybody with a laptop right now. And when you are able to create calls that sound very close to the sitting president, the former president, or an influential celebrity, or anything, or even images that could be broadcast on social media that are made of not real, and they're not disclaimed. There's no disclaimer. There's also no law against it. It's very concerning to me that in the hands of political operatives on both sides of the aisle, what they will be willing to do to try to win an election or influence an election at the last minute, it's something that I'm hoping all sides, regardless of party, realize this is a dangerous step and probably one too far.
And I wonder, Rick, how much of a disruptor do you see artificial intelligence to be?
I agree with Mark. It's a potentially enormous disruptor. At the Lincoln Project, we've got a series of best practices we use with anything that's AI generated. We disclaim it on the screen. We don't generate fake footage of Trump saying something horrible. We won't do anything like that. We believe that AI is going to be a reality in this future landscape. We think there are ways to do it creatively and ethically and smartly, but there really are a lot of people who will do things that with AI in the coming years that are going to make the deep fake stuff we're seeing right now look like child's play, like crayon drawings. And I'm deeply concerned about it. And it really is a danger that requires, I think, look, I'm not a big federal regulation guy as a rule of speech matters, but I do believe the FEC needs to really have a strong position on this about disclaiming AI items in robocalls, ads, or any other collateral materials. It's fascinating, but a dangerous subject.
Yeah, an issue all round. Rick, what about this, in a close run race, the impact of independent candidates? What impact do you think there might be?
Well, look, this is one of the tricky parts of this election cycle. There are, a lot of independent candidates out there on the left, the Jill Steins, the Cornel West, et cetera. Those I generally factor into what I call noise in the electorate. They generally will pull 1%, 1.5%, 2% here and there. Could be significant in some places, but they're going to do the best in states that are already very, very blue. So they won't really upset the Electoral College map. No Labels would like to put a conservative third-party candidate on there. Who is a moderate sort of conservative to draw votes away from Biden, from conservative Democrats. We think that's a pretty big risk. RFK Jr., in my polling and analysis that we've done so far on him, he kind of weirdly splits the baby. There are a lot of Democrats who hear the name Kennedy and they immediately go, "Oh, it's a Kennedy. I love him." There are a lot of Republicans who like him for the conspiracy stuff, the anti-vaccination stuff, all the sort of Joe Rogan kooky kind of stuff that he's involved in. And when it's interesting, you can tell that the Republicans are worried about that because before he decided to run as an independent and not as a Democrat, he was on Fox News about 3 times a week. The minute he decided to run as an independent who could hurt Republicans, he disappeared from the landscape. So,
Mark, let me get your take on RFK Jr. because he's in that interesting middle ground.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we've had a history of of attempts at getting a third-party candidate. Obviously, Ross Perot in 1992, John Anderson in 1980, who have tried to do this. Most of the national polling I have seen when you go Biden, Trump head-to-head or you include these 4 or 5 other parties or potential other parties, the margin stays roughly the same. If not anything, it might shift even a little bit more in favor of Trump. But I think Rick's right in terms of it will break differently by different states in terms of what section of the electorate may be attracted to a third party and different third parties. What is one party, one state's good third party might not do very well in another third party in another state. So it's really kind of untested ground. I don't think it's really mattered, generally speaking. But this case right now, I think it's really just kind of lowering everyone's numbers, but not changing the outcome.
In some of the polls, though, RFK Jr. actually came out higher than Biden or Trump.
I have not seen any of those recently, and where he would be able to do anything. And I don't think any of these candidates will actually win an electoral college vote in any way, shape, or form. I think they'll just adjust the margins of victory in the states themselves.
And Mark, what sort of role do you feel the U.S. media, which has become very partisan as we've seen in recent years, what role will they play in shaping the election?
Well, they're going to try to do everything they can to put their thumb on the scale against Donald Trump. Obviously there are conservative outlets. Most of the mainstream media does not lean that direction. But we'll see. They played a very big role in the 2020 election with outright censorship of stories that are now considered to be fact and have been proven true regarding like the Hunter Biden laptop. We see them running constant cover for the scandals that are facing the Biden administration. But what I'm really concerned about, going back to our previous discussion, is with no trusted independent media source that almost everyone can take as gospel truth for fact or purveyors of fact. When we get into this AI battle and when someone of either party, I don't know who it is, crosses the line, well, if one outlet says it's a fake and a deep fake and the other one doesn't, are we just going to retreat to our partisan corners? Or do we have someone that can actually with credibility stand up and say, no, this is wrong, this is fake, and the American people, regardless of your politics, should ignore it?
Rick, that's an important point. When it comes to information, is there such a thing as a fact anymore? If you consider the fact that the media, has been very partisan in its ways, it's all about confirmation bias and echo chambers, isn't it?
There's a lot of desire for confirmation and validation inside the American electorate on left and right. It is increasingly difficult to distinguish fact from assertion. It is increasingly difficult to verify facts because there are people that make a living distributing information that is completely false. And I don't just mean like putting a spin on it, like you might see on the right on Fox or on the left on MSN. I mean people who make things up that are wildly untrue in every way, simply to churn the waters here politically. And those can range from domestic actors to the Chinese, to the Russians, to the Iranians. There's a whole spectrum of folks that the more chaos in American elections exists, the better for them.
But Rick, polls have also been showing that there's little appetite for either candidate right now, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. What does that say about the political process in the U.S.?
Look, our parties both have an incumbency bias that's very powerful. Trump is the functional incumbent for the Republican Party. Biden is the functional incumbent for the Democratic Party. These are both men who are in their retirement years. Nobody's going to dispute that. That's part of why there's a lack of enthusiasm. Part of the lack of enthusiasm on the Democratic Party side is that they are big believers in in making the best the enemy of the good, and dreaming that some magical new young person, a new Obama, will walk onto the stage somehow miraculously. It's just not how it works. A lot of Republicans in the DeSantis camp or the Haley camp or the Christie camp wanted a new idea for the Republican Party, but incumbency bias is incredibly powerful, and that is certainly, I think it's more pronounced inside the Republican Party right now, but both parties want to be with the guy they want to be with, and that tends to be the person they associate with being the incumbent.
Well, Mark, this year sees more elections around the world than at any time in history. And traditionally, the world has looked to the US as the beacon of democracy. But considering what happened in 2020 with all the fights over the election and, arguments that took place, and then, we've got 2024 coming up, the chance of a similar thing happening, where do things stand?
Well, I think this is a problem. I think this is a problem on both sides. It's not just a Republican problem. I mean, Democrats have objected to the certification of every election they have lost since 2000. They called George W. Bush an illegitimate president, said the only reason why he was elected was because he was appointed by a Supreme Court. They challenged the 2004 results. Of course, they challenged 2016 because of the fake Russia story. So this is a problem on both parties, that if you can't accept that you've lost, and move on with grace and salute the flag, and we'll treat the office with respect, and you try to win the next one. Obviously January 6th was a difficult day, and it was a very pronounced day, but this was a problem that was building for decades on the left as well as most recently on the right. And I think all partisans, I mean, too many people across America, maybe even a little bit across the world, are treating politics and our electoral process like we do our sporting teams. The problem is that they don't see the players gather at the end of the game, shake hands, sometimes pray together, and wish each other best of seasons. Obviously Rick and I disagree sometimes, but I still, I consider him a worthy adversary and brilliant in some of his political analysis. It's not personal between us, and I wish more people in America could actually see, even with Democrats or among fellow Republicans, that we're professionals at what we do, like you see on the sporting field, but we all wish each other a good game and hope for health for families afterwards. It's not as personal as people think it is.
Well, it's good to see we can have a healthy argument and not a shouting debate. Mark Lotter, I want to thank you very much. Rick Wilson, thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Tallahassee in Florida. I hope to speak to you both again soon.
Absolutely.
See you soon.